would you start by telling me about when your family first came here? You said your dad had homesteaded this area.
Yeah, my dad, he come from Norway, and he landed on his 18th birthday. He landed in New York. So he had a relative out in South Dakota, Amundsen. So he went out there. Then, of course, this North Shore reminded him so much of Norway. The rock-bound coast. I've been fishing over there. Of course, he was only 18 years old. But anyway, he landed in, he went to Duluth then, and then first boat in the spring of the year up to Isle Royal. Stayed there all summer, fishing, and back to Duluth, and landed as a lumberjack. Now that was when they were logging there right in Duluth, you know, and they didn't have no logging camp, but they stayed down in town, and then they'd haul them out with a horse and sleigh early in the morning. They'd take them out there so early, it was still dark and it was cold. They had to make a fire to keep warm with that. Then they started working, and then of course at noon they hauled the food out to them. And he said if you weren't eat in a hurry, the beans would freeze to your plate because there was no shack or anything, see, and back downtown again. And then mother, she was from over there in Norway too, but they didn't know each other there. So they got acquainted in Duluth. Of course, mother had a brother in Two Harbors that was a carpenter. Her name was Carlson. Well, they got married then, and then they built a shack, squatted right there where the Life Action Park is now. And then Dad would go up there to Isle Royal, and she would go with too. But then they started raising a family, and mother finally says, no, we didn't like to go up there, bring their kids up there and stay there all summer long. So Dad figured then I was going to try to find a place, and they had seen the shore so much then, you know, that they knew. So Dad and my Uncle Tom, they took off in a little 18-foot sailboat, started up the shore to see if they could find a place. That was about in 1896. So over here in Castle Danger, you know, that shallow reef outside there, it broke up all the rough water, and it was just like a harbor, and they're all sand. And they pulled in there, and there was one man living there. He was a family man, and he had been there since 1893. His name was Ole Wick. So they asked him, he had squatted too, he didn't own the land. They asked him if it was all right. It looked like a nice place to operate out of. Yeah, said, go ahead. So then they built a shack down there. And there was other guys in there, there was quite a few fellows there. But then around the turn of the century, Ole Wick there, he had a chance to buy the land from some company in Wisconsin, I guess. So he bought the land, and then he told them fellows, you gotta move now, because this is my property. So that's when Dad found out about this homestead here, 40 acres. So he applied for that around in 1902, and if he hadn't done any improvement, he would lose it. It would go back to the government again. But then by 1904, that's when he had the house built here, and then he got the title. So all the other fellows, they had to move out of there too, you know. Then, of course, all the timber was still here, you know. And most all the timber here along the North Shore them days was white pine. And when they got logged and time went by, the second crop that came back might be something around when the pine will come back again. Mostly, there wasn't no sawmills on the North Shore then, you know. All the logs were shoved in the lake and rafted across over to, across the lake, mostly around Bayfield and Ashland. Then, of course, Dad had it in his mind that he's going to have a farm because he had that. So then he started clearing the land here, you know, and then the timber companies, he come around and wanted to buy all that white pine. They had a guy going in the woods, and he could tell just about how many board feet there was in each tree, and then he gave whoever owned the property. But you know, right up here now where the road meets the highway, right across up there, there was one white pine. She was standing kind of on a hill there, and the fishermen were out in the lake. They used that as a landmark, you know. And for a white pine, that was a champion. The lumberjack cut it down. Dad and some other guys, they went up and measured that stump, and measured 7 feet across the stump.
7
now,
feet?
They had big trees out west, but for white pine, that was a master. Now, we still got a 6-foot 2-man saw down in the fish out workshop there, you know, that we used because before we had a chainsaw, we had to cut trees too, you know. But them fellows, them lumberjacks, they must have had at least a 9-foot saw, you know, as a handle on both ends, and otherwise they wouldn't get no stroke on it. And we had a lot of trees here on this 40 here that was, it was 4 feet on the stump. if you walk back in the woods right back of the field here now, you can still see some of them stumps, they're pretty well decayed, but you see they don't rot off too fast because there's a lot of pine tar in them roots. That's a preservative, they don't rot very fast. Them pine trees, they had roots that they go down in the dirt more. A spruce or balsam, the roots will grow on the top. But Dad had this relative is come over here from North Dakota, or South Dakota, and the stumps, were still standing up on the field there, a lot of them. Miss Emmons, and he says to Dad, how do you get rid of them stumps? Well, Dad says, I'll show you. He took a bar and some dynamite, made a hole in underneath and put a fuse and cap on and lit it, and they walked over on the field, and after a while, and then he went over there. Yeah, but this Emmons, and it made an awful big hole in the ground then, But then we were kids, we had to work. We took a pick or a grub hoe, then we had to pick most of all that dirt out of the stump, fill it back in the hole again, So then we had a winch, we called it. It was a round piece with a 1-inch rope on it and about a 12-foot handle, one man on each end, and then had single block anchored it, and then put a rope around the stump. And you could take quite a pull then, a couple of guys with that, going around there, and it was that's what we had first to pull up our boats with too, until we got electricity in here, but call it a winch. That picture there, I took that I think it was about in 1928. That was that passenger boat, Canadian boat that during the summer he operated between Duluth, and I think they would go down to as far as the Niagara Falls or the Huronic. No, this one here, that was the Canadian had three of them: Harmonic, Huronic, and the Noronic, and then they'd pick up fish, Well, this one here now, he'd go about I think about 2 or 3 trips a week, leave Duluth, and his first stop would be Port Arthur, Fort William, which is Thunder Bay now, and then they'd go out around the island and pick up the fish, and then back to Duluth again. And this was around in July, I think about in 1928, my cousin from Duluth, him and I were down there. We went down to go trolling, We knew that fellow that lived right on at Grand Portage there. And Oberg was his name, so we pitched a tent there and slept there. And he had about a 14-foot round bottom, and we had a 2.5 horse Johnson with us, So we'd take and put that on the boat, and then we'd go trolling right outside that island out there, and we catch some fish. Then he had an ice house outside there with ice that had been sawed out of the lake, and then sawdust to cover it, So that one morning, Eddie and I were going to go trolling, but it was awfully foggy. And that, I don't remember the name of that island. It's right out there in Grand Portage. But we didn't have no compass or anything, but we figured just about where it is and run out there. Then, because we trolled back and forth along the island, this was a good place, So the fog was thick. So we took off and we headed out there, and pretty soon we were almost right on the island. Well, then we started trolling on back and forth on the outside just so we could see shore, Then it lifted, and then we could look across to Washawanigan Bay over to Hat Point. And from Oberg and over there, it's 2 miles, it's a straight stretch. Big bay in there, and Sushi Islands. There we seen a boat like that, just like that. Boy, we couldn't figure out what the heck that was. So, it was around noon when we got in, and we told Oberg about it. And he had a little double-ender boat, inboard motor, and he was fishing trout, with the net. No, he says, I don't think. But he says, I got some nets over there. I'm going to go over and lift him. And he followed the boat and bay until he got over there. But he didn't get over quite to where this boat was, And he come back then and we talked with him. No, he says, you guys must have seen him. But then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the fog lifted. We went and told Oberg. No, I says, go out there and take a look. Sure enough. So then we run over there, with that little boat. And they had gotten help then. It was about 45 miles from there to Port Arthur. But they had come out with 3 of them tugs. And they had hooked onto that Huronic to try to pull her off. You can see the one of them there now. And no, sir. That one island there, when it's stormy, it washes over, so there's no vegetation on it, just a little. So when we come over there, man, the weight from them tugs, churning that water, boy, but we run around to the other side, and then we got in there, and I've regretted it ever since. But there, right on the rock, here laid a piece of plate, off of the bottom. It was about that long and that wide, and it was just like it was twisted like a propeller, about 5/8 of an inch thick. I should have brought that for a souvenir and put it alongside that picture, because it ripped just about. She was on there, for they couldn't get her off. There was a few people hurt there, but it wasn't very serious. But anyway, he finally made arrangements with his oarboat. But right there at Grand Portage, it's quite a ways out to where the steamboats go, because but they made arrangements for an oarboat to come in there for the load of ore, because it was deep pretty close by there. He backed in there, and this oarboat was loaded with ore, I suppose, maybe about 18,000 tons. He got her moving, and by golly, he pulled her off. But they got a double bottom in them things, so they had the water pump going to keep her, and then they took one of them tugs there. They towed her into Port Arthur. They had a dry dock there. And what did they say? They had to put in about 48 new steel plates in her. But, they said that he was off his course about 8 miles there, that coming through there kind of at night, and it was, they claimed, them days, they didn't have them compasses they got. They claimed it's daggone iron or copper or something back in the hills there that drew that needle, because she was off too far. The guy thought they were coming there full speed, and they figured everything was in there clear, but he was off his course about 8 miles this way.
8 miles.
Now they got all that. Now with this new equipment they got now, radar. Just if you look at it from shore, right over there by Washwanigan Bay, or just before you get to it, if he would have been either, I'd say 100 feet out farther or 100 feet inside, you would have missed that thing slick and clean. But it's a good thing he didn't hit her on the inside, because that hat point that comes out there, they're kind of a bluff there. Oh, if he would have got out there and hit her, she would have. You see that there at the bottom of the island there, it just sloped out just like you run them up on the dock.
You were telling me about this boat, the Doris, that your dad, did he build it or did he have it built?
He had it built. Dad was no carpenter. He had it built by a fellow. It was built right over here. Then they had to lay down some logs, and shove her in the lake. And then they towed it to 2 harbors, because we had a brother-in-law and an uncle that worked in the shops there, They have a repairing. So they hauled her in there, and then my brother-in-law, they installed a motor there during the winter, see. It depended on the weather, but around the 1st of December, and you could start in. But usually, they just take them herring. It was all herring. They never cleaned them, Laid them off on the rocks, and you couldn't just dump them. You have to lay them quite straight, and then the next morning, you'd have a gunny sack, and one guy hold the sack and throw them in there so they were pretty much one direction straight, and they hung about 100 pounds through the sack. They weighed them and then sewed them together with his top with a couple of ears on them, the way sack needle and seaming twine. And they were easy to load them. They had to load them in the skiff and then roll them out to the boat. But some places there was now little 2 harbors. There's a fellow by the name of George Hans. He had a dock there. And then, of course, if you that red building over here now, which is got a shower bath in there for the tourists and a laundry building for washing clothes. But, them days you'd get what you'd call January thaw. And if you had fish any place frozen, I know we used to stock them down there in their shade down along the fish house there and cover them over, But that's why we built that building. That building was built about in 1924, insulated. And if the herring were frozen, and you put them in there and probably have 8-10 ton of herring in there, they'd keep them without any kind of because usually that weather you'd probably get a few days, it'd get pretty warm. Well, that's why we built that building. Then, of course, about in 1st of February, middle of February, then that business would die off, because an awful lot. Dad run an ad in the farmer paper, and that took care of mostly of Minnesota, North and South Dakota, and Wisconsin, I think, and part of Iowa. Circulation. It was published by the Web Publishing Company, I think, in the Twin Cities. But run the ad in there, and then of course you'd have to get that in there pretty early in the fall. But we got it ready by about the 1st of December. Sometimes you get that warm weather with a lot of fishing. Got spoiled on the shore, and then there was some of them guys when the highway come through in 24. They started mink farming, Boy, did they have mink farms, and bought that herring, it was you couldn't sell it for fresh fish, maybe thawed out, but they had freezers where they could freeze them again. And did we get a crop? Potatoes? We counted. Well, you'd have to have a heap on a bushel basket to make 60 pounds, you know. But 50 some potatoes. And man, we had another picture of my sister. She was walking in the wheat field up there. That wheat was way up above her head, you know. But then in about 3 periods, that ground was just burnt up from the fish, you know. And then we had to start fertilizing again. Of course, then we had cattle and haul manure up there, you know. We raised wheat and oats and potatoes and, of course, hay crop, clover and timothy. But we didn't raise any corn here. It was a little too cold. We didn't raise barley either. But the wheat, we'd have to cut it with a scythe, so much, you know, and then bundle it. And then we had a place where we stored it for the chickens. And let them thrash it out. He'd throw in a bundle in the chicken coop in the wintertime. It was on his 3rd birthday. He was running that 9 8/10 horsepower Evinrude. I had to start it for him, of course, but I says, "Can you handle it?" Yeah, he was kind of making a noise, but that was taken. I sent that down to the Evinrude people, and they gave me a prize on it. He says, I told him we start him early here. It was on his 3rd birthday, the 10th of October. Here's some of them boats we used to have for here's the barn we had here. He tore down.
Oh, yeah.
And here's one of them boats, Bluefin. Now, Hokey built that one.
He did?
Yeah, but we bought it from him. Here's another one, that first one we built from by the fish house there. We had a net reel. We reeled up our nets, you know. Then right over in the woods there, we built our first cabin in 1933. So we had a Bible student here teaching Bible for the kids a couple of weeks during the summer, Richard Friday. And he says, "What are you going to call this place?" Well, he says, now a lot of these fellows are starting building tourist cabins. They got names on their places. Like my brother Dave over there, he called his Let Us Loaf, and then Charlie Alving Mighty Fine, and Island View. And he says, you know what you should call this place? You should call it Castle Haven, because it's like a haven down in here. So that's how it got his name, Richard Friday. And we had a gate over there, you see, over there, Brother Carl and I. And then we had a log bolted on the point down there where we pulled in with our boat, you know, and kept them anchored over there inside the Castle Danger Reef during the night. We couldn't have them out here because it's all open.
How did you come to have cabins here instead of the farm?
Well, we had the farm, but the farm, we had 18 head of cattle, and we had a team of horses, you know. Well, I don't know, the people who were started with, especially with this trolling for lake trout, I'd take out as high as 6 different parties in one day, $3 an hour, furnished everything.
So it was better money taking care of the tourists than it was farming?
Oh, yeah. Look at here. State of Minnesota, County of Lake, 25 cents. County of Lake, State of Minnesota, hereby licensed to hunt, catch, and kill deer, elk, caribou, moose in the state of Minnesota for a period of 1 year from the date of the issuance of this license under the provisions and conditions of Chapter 242 of Wallace 1899, dated at Two Harbors, 31st day of October, 1900, County Auditor.
25 cents.
25 cents. But look at here what you could shoot.
Grouse, quail, partridges, ruffled grouse, pheasants,
Yeah.
wild duck, deer, moose and caribou, trout, bass, just about anything you wanted.
Yeah.
This boat that says Castle Haven on the bow, was that the one you used to take people out trolling?
Yeah, and the last one we built was a 26-footer, pretty good sized boat. The lamprey come in here, we figured that a wooden boat standing on shore, not being used, it'll deteriorate faster than, so we sold all ours. It took about 8 years before they found out cure for the lamprey. Otherwise people would come here and want to go trolling. We told them no, just want to be a boat ride because there's just no trout left in the lake. Lamprey, oh, dead lake trout laying out there on Isle Royal, man, life.
So you did some boat building yourself then?
Oh yeah, we built a lot of them. We built a lot of them skiffs, you know. We bought built all the way up to Isle Royal, Grand Portage. We built a boat for it. Right? Probably a few years ago now. We used to go over there, Gooseberry, you know. That was our Sunday. Every Sunday was early in the spring, you know, go over there, brook trout fishing. And there's 4 of them skiffs. We built 1 year for the commercial fishermen along the shore here. Some guys at North Knife River and Larsemont and up as high as up to Hollow Rock up there. Isle Royal, Peter Edison, I don't know if that boat skiff is still up there.
You folks must have had a good reputation as builders.
Well, yes, yeah. I was just a kid. Well, I wasn't real.
It's almost as big as you are.
I hit him over the head with an oar, and I carried him home from Bombay Gooseberry. He was laying up in a small channel there, you know, and I got up there, and he was laying there breathing, and I took the oar, but I knocked half of the blade out of that oar, but I knocked him out and carried him home. Now, when we were kids, we had to work. Look at the wood pile. We had to split birch, and that's all we had for cooking, you know, wood stove.
I thought that was a building of some kind.
No, sir, that was all hand split birch. Here's another picture of it.
It looks like it's about 10 feet high.
Yeah. Then you'd have, you know, about cooking and heating and the heaters, all wood. There was no gas or oil around here them days. Yeah, there's Hokey, the violin, and I played the accordion, and we would play at dances,
Oh.
Yeah, I still got the organ down in the fish house. If you came out of our church, I'd play on that once in a while. And I got accordion there too, of course.
You still play the accordion?
Oh yeah.
When did they put the road in? So
About in 24. Otherwise, we had a road before that, about in 1921, but then we had to drive up there where the landfill is now, inland. About 19 miles to Two Harbors them days, but then when the snow came on the ground, they didn't plow it or anything, so. What happened that year, I can't remember his name, but he was a trap from over there at Knife River or Larchmont, and he'd go out setting traps, for wolves, because there was a bounty on them them days. And he had a trap line, and up around the back of Finland, up in there, and he was walking along there, it was early in the spring, and he thought he heard something, and here the lumberjacks, many years ago, they had cut down a big pine tree, and it was no good, so they left it, but it was hollow. And it must have been a good sized tree, because he thought he heard a little snow on the ground. He crawled in, the fellow, in that, and you believe it or not, there was 8 timber wolf pups. He put them in his Mackinaw, and the only thing he carried with him was a gun with a single shot 22 pistol. Now I don't know if the mother would have been around there when he was in there. He might have tackled him. So he brought him back to Two Harbors, and then you see you could get $9 for cubs, or 15 for a full grown. So he had a friend there right where that mall is on the upper side of 7th Avenue, Wally Pearson. He was a Chevrolet dealer, We bought cars from him. Anyway, he says, why don't you leave them here? We maybe can sell them. Why? They rigged up a little pen in there, and don't you think they sold every one for $15? And we bought one, and we raised them. That same year, when we had that little deer, when they got that fawn, he was walking around, and pretty soon that wolf go back and start snipping on his legs. So whenever that deer was feeding on that clover, he'd look around. So finally, then we took and tied up that wolf up here in the woodshed. And, that Alan, he'd take that mouth organ and he'd go up there and start playing. And that wolf, he would howl, oh, holy smoke. But then, one night, that daggone, he chopped the wolf off. And he was gone. He was going to get on his own, I guess. But he got hungry and come back. Then we put a chain on there instead of it was getting towards fall then, and we didn't want to keep winter, So we called the suit on it and asked them if they'd want to buy it. Yeah, well, we are kind of short of funds. Well, he says, how much do you want for it? Well, I says, I can shoot them and get $15. Well, in that case, he says, bring it down. So I picked the wolf up in my arms and laid him in the back seat of the car, And we brought them down there. And they had 2 more in there out of that same batch. But they were much smaller. Now this one here, we never gave him any raw meat. Boiled everything, bone, fish and stuff like that. No raw. So he was just like a police dog, vicious. Laid him in the back seat there, and he laid there just like a dog, And it was funny how he trying to nip that deer,
Yeah. So he ended up at the zoo in, was it Duluth? He ended up at the zoo in...
Yeah, in Duluth. One day when Carl was up brook trout fishing up in the gooseberry, right around Decoration Day, there was a little fawn. So he picked him up and took him, put him inside the house there. We had a heater in the living room there, and he laid there just like he was dead, He didn't want to breathe, but then finally he got hungry, so we took and they got a pint bottle, put a nipple on it. We had cattle, and then after a while he'd follow us around out in the woods, in the house there, just like that. And then here, this is Alan. He was staying here then. It was our outside toilet there. We didn't have any plumbing in the house. But anyway, we had a porch on the back. I don't know if we got any picture of the old house here, but he'd come, around when he got hungry. This must have been about 11, 12 o'clock. So Alan, he goes in and gets the bottle. Mother filled it up for him. Kid takes it out there, He was standing on the porch, and the deer, he couldn't get it. So doggone kid, he went in the house and got a scissors, and he cut the end of the nipple off. If I would have had a camera, then you give it to him. But then, he was getting it so fast that he couldn't swallow, He started coughing, and the milk started coming out of his nostrils, and Alan, he was standing there laughing. Oh, you talk about a picnic.